1986 was quite a momentous year in my life professionally. I had been in practice already for 8 years as a principal and founder of Klein Taylor Goldsmith. I had had a long-time friend in Alan Brown. Alan Brown was a partner in the firm of Kurtner Brown Architects. The other partner there, of course, was Brian Kurtner. So when Alan announced that he was going to become a developer, he said to Brian, his partner, he said, "I think it would be fantastic if you and Les put your two firms together." We looked at the strengths and weaknesses of each firm, and then we looked at the strengths and weaknesses of the two firms together, and we realized that we had this perfect overlap. By the time that June 1st, 1986 came around, we had formed a new firm, Quadrangle Architects Limited. We liked it, first of all, because there were 4 partners. But second of all, because Quadrangle is an architectural form, it's an open space created by buildings. And most importantly, because Quadrangle was associated with universities, where learning took place, where ideas were exchanged, and where there was strong communication among interdisciplinary fields. We looked long and hard for space, a lot of different places. And we ultimately found this building on the north side of Wellington Street, just west of Spadina, in an area that was, shall we say, savaged by the economy. You could, without any concern whatsoever, set up a cannon at one end of Wellington Street, and any time after 5 o'clock, fire away without any fear of actually hitting anybody. But we loved it, and what we really wanted to do was to create an open, interactive, collaborative environment. We could hear each other conduct business all day long, and there was an osmosis in the way that we picked up each other's values and reflected each other's values. That strange and unusual, even to this day, combination of business acumen and design excellence.
We hadn't done traditional television, so we didn't know what we were breaking in a way.
I had this idea of studios in the streets, trying to achieve mobility, and to the degree that we were in a building, I wanted that building to be easily accessible, not organized like a fortress. And I remember the first time I hauled out my phrase that I wanted to build a building that would shoot itself, and got the usual kind of perplexed looks, but instead of kind of dismissal at Quadrangle, I met people who said, "Yeah, that sounds cool, how do we do that?"
We got everyone around the table, all the technicians, the producers, the creative people, Moses, and we got their input before we started the project. We needed to understand what they envisioned and how they did things, what would work better.
The phrase that Moses used to use was the living movie. Everything was constantly in action and constantly on exposure. You literally could watch somebody walk in the front door past much music, walk through a staging of fashion television, and then walk into the newsroom as the 6 o'clock went on. You could see the person walk through 3 different television platforms simultaneously.
When John Cassidy reached out to Quadrangle to do the new chorus building, he came to us because of our experience, but also our out-of-the-box thinking and our ability to see their vision and where they were going, and also to help lead them to a successful solution.
I remember the first time walking into a Quadrangle design project, and that was the chorus building down on the waterfront. And, you know, there's a lot of eye-popping stuff there, you know, that really kind of creative spark. You know, people have kind of looked at something, taken a simple thing like a light fixture and done it differently.
The piece that people remember about Chorus the best is probably this 3-story slide. It's not usual that you're in a corporate environment and you have something that you can fast track your way down 2 floors. It really was a wonderful aha moment in the design of the building when we were thinking about how is it that we can express the overall personality of Chorus. And it's about whimsy, and it's about delight. And why not do a slide? Let's have some fun with it.
We came here to Quadrangle's office to look at different solutions for the site, and there may have been 20 or 30 different versions. And there were some that were really refined, some that were just simple little sketches. But everybody was allowed to present their kind of concepts. And very quietly in the corner, there was a diagram, just a simple sketch of a tower, and beside it was a Christian Louboutin shoe. And it was that color contrast between the black and the red and the stiletto part of it. And the inspiration from that shoe, because it was in the fashion district, became the inspiration for the tower. But it was this kind of studio environment that I think Quadrangle really kind of nurtured and really helped to promote. And I just thought that was a wonderful experience.
I think one of the things that's very unique over here is that we don't take things for granted. We really start the process by trying to redefine what are the real issues here, as opposed to just going straight to the solutions. What are the client's real needs here, and how could we best achieve them?
It's a tough business out there. You like to work with people that you trust, and you know will do what they say they are going to do.
My connection to Quadrangle actually goes back to the very early days of Filmport. Our lease was expiring and we had some pretty serious interest in being part of a larger complex. Filmport guys had retained Quadrangle, and I had retained a firm that was a competitor. What struck me about all of that was that the smartest guys in the room were Les Klein and Ted Shore. Those were my first impressions of Quadrangle, and when Deluxe finally did have to relocate, it was easy to pick up the phone called Quadrangle, and it was probably the best phone call I ever made.
You know, Brian had a long-term vision ultimately for our retail group. Like so much of our business, it's all relationship-based, and those relationships tend to grow. And as people's careers take them on to new adventures and they move on, it can lead on to new connections and new relationships with new companies. And that's precisely what happened with our retail group.
You know, I think I first met Les Klein and got to know him through my involvement and his involvement in the Urban Land Institute. Les was also working in Regent Park when we were and became involved, and Quadrangle became a major donor to the Daniel Spectrum project. It's been phenomenal now to kind of take that relationship to a whole different level, working on the Artscape Launchpad project together.
You know, a key trademark of Quadrangle from a client's perspective is that ability to listen to a customer, to understand what they're trying to achieve, and help them with their goals. And that's a very special talent, and that's in the firm's DNA, and which is why we so much enjoy working with Quadrangle.
It was the first condominium, one of the very first condominiums built in downtown. And many people said, why would you want to build a condo in downtown Toronto? Who in the world wants to build a condo? Who wants to live there? But we built this building that was really emulated as a fantastic, integrated into the city kind of development. And for many years, that building appeared in planning documents that the city put out.
One of the things that we've been doing is continuing to build on the legacy of the St. James project, which still today resonates in that part of the city. But now what we're seeing is innovative, modern use of those kinds of typologies in different contexts. So looking at still densification, moderation between building sizes, but now one of the great opportunities that we have is to also start looking at mid-rise construction using wood as a building material. And what this has done is it's really unlocked a lot of opportunities for developers from a cost perspective that wouldn't have otherwise been able to build these types of buildings. So we continue to be ahead of the curve in the sense that we were also the first architects in the city of Toronto to apply for a building permit to build a 6-story building out of wood.
BMW was an incredible project to work on because it was technically challenging, it was design challenging, it was an existing building that we were adapting into a new use, and through a lot of regulatory agencies that needed to have their approval and their say. All of those things all came together in what turned out to be an incredible project that people still talk about to this day as a giant illuminated billboard for an automobile on the side of a highway.
Working with Brian initially, and then working with Richard and his team to bring this building back to life. I don't think we could have been you're nearly as successful as we have been without Quadrangle as our partner.
Even though you think you know what it's going to be like, actually when you start to clean it, when you start to strip things out, it brings out a whole new identity that lies, kind of covered underneath. We looked beyond what we could do because adaptive reuse is obviously very complicated, and how do we reconnect it to the future rather than just being rooted in the past. I love the big super graphic, the big 60 on the side. It sort of is new, but at the same time it talks about the history of signage being painted on buildings, which is what it used to have. I also love, of course, the new core with the weathering steel, Corten steel fins. And we had a whole narrative of raw to refined kind of material palette. By taking 60 Atlantic and turning it into something which the public can engage in, which has great new tenants, we're able to breathe new life into the area as a whole. And 80 Atlantic is going to take that trajectory and take it much further.
So fundamentally, they had this asset, which was an existing 12-story building with high-end retail at the base, 10 stories of high-quality office space, and then this jewel of a penthouse. And he wanted to put a whole new building on top of it. And the plan was to do all of this while the people remained within the building.
And there was many times where it looked like it was difficult or impossible to achieve what it was we were trying to do. And like Brian would say, okay, boss, we got it, we'll get back to you.
It was like doing open heart surgery while the patient was still alive. So in order to add these 7 stories on top of it, we had to reinforce all of the foundations underneath the new part of the building. And then we had to work our way up through every single floor, through every single tenant space virtually, and reinforce that building for seismic. And to layer onto that, we were in an area where the noise ordinances put us in a certain place, because there was residential, there was retail, and there were commercial, and you had to satisfy all of those people, which left us cutting concrete about 45 minutes a day. You draw it, and you talk about it, and you meet about it, and you look at all the complications, and then suddenly it's there. You can't hide from what you've done. And this was definitely a building we didn't want to hide from. You looked at it, and you just felt proud.
When we started to see the evolution of what was going to happen, probably early 90s, downtown Markham, it's 94. From that plan getting approved to then governments looking at what we were trying to do there and trying to create nodes, in essence, in suburban areas, where they said, that's not a bad idea, that's something we should be looking at.
Kilometers of continuous building frontage made up of a mix of multi-unit residential buildings, commercial buildings, retail, mixed use with cinemas, a hotel, and even a privately owned public park that has a major carousel in it.
That's architecture, frozen music, music in space, frozen.
The challenges that we had with this project were significant. We had to build a 70,000 square foot facility. We had a very tight budget to do that. We had to rip off the 8th floor of a 8th story building that we were moving into. We needed to have a business that was first and foremost safe and secure. We have customers here like Disney and Fox and Paramount and Universal and Entertainment One and others, all of whom are primarily concerned about protecting their assets. So security for us became a big design feature. We built one of the largest in-house data centers in our industry in Canada on this site. And what gave, I think, Deluxe the confidence to move forward was the advice and the consultation that we received from Ted and his team every step of the way. We knew we could do it.
The last 30 years has been defined by change. I think the next 30 years is going to be defined by smarter change. Quadrangle are part of that conversation. You can see it in the practice and the way they diversified internally in their practice and the way they lead things like the mid-block conversation, not because they have to, because they want to. And because they're looking to solve problems that people haven't even started to talk about yet in a way that makes sense for, not themselves, makes sense for the people that are going to have to live in these environments. And that's the mark of great architecture.
Quadrangle helped us learn how to work with nonprofit housing groups, how to become better at what we do in relating to a community that has a very specific agenda and mandate. Most recently, we're totally thrilled to be working with the team from Quadrangle very actively in our Regent Park community. We have one amazing new condominium under construction right now, and another one that we're planning, and we're excited about that connectivity.
We were the accessibility consultant to the Athletes Village, which gave us an amazing opportunity to work with other people here at Quadrangle who were involved in a greater role on the village as well, but on building a new neighborhood and making it sure that it met really high accessibility standards. In addition, we were the accessibility consultant on 4 of the sports venues, which gave us the opportunity to research and implement worldwide best practices in accessibility and inclusive design for large sporting facilities. This year is the 10th anniversary of the AODA legislation, and so coupled with that, we know that we've left a legacy that's really going to improve accessibility here in Ontario and has educated a lot of people about the power of accessible design.
I think in the future, Quadrangle will continue on this tremendous growth spurt that we have. I think we've kind of built the framework for a pretty exciting and interesting place that opens up all sorts of possibilities for not only the people we have, but the clients that we have too. So I see a tremendous amount of building upon those values that we've kind of set out for ourselves over the past 30 years going forward.
We have partners who are the future of Quadrangle. They are individuals, they've made great contributions, but they are essentially part of Quadrangle. So I think the future of Quadrangle is very bright because we've created a way of working and a way of communicating with a particular kind of client that will be the driving force for the future of the city.